Hey, y'all, my name is Lacey Dunn. I am a registered dietitian living out of Jacksonville, Florida, and I'm so excited today to be talking about healing hormones for optimal sleep. So, a little bit about me. Like I said, I'm a registered dietitian. I have a master's degree from Texas Women's University. I'm a fellow hypothyroid warrior, and I've been put through the ringer myself when it comes down to sleep issues, candida, H. pylori, hormonal imbalances, you name it. So, I'm very stoked to be here with you guys. And I know this summit is all about sleep, optimizing your sleep. And today we're going to talk about optimizing your hormones and the hormones involved that can influence your sleep, causing it to be terrible or maybe even awesome. So we're going to dive in. I am an author. So I wrote The Women's Guide to Hormonal Harmony, which is all about, being the boss of your own body, rebalancing your hormones to have the best metabolism that you can have. So I hope you guys can check that out. If you have any further questions on the presentation here or the hormones involved, I go into the nitty gritties. I poured my heart into that book. So if you have questions on your hormones, I can almost promise you it will be answered in my book. So we're going to start with some hormone truths here. We need to make sure that we don't demonize our hormones. Our hormones are chemical messengers, so we don't want to shoot the messenger. If there's something off when it comes down to our hormones, typically that's a fire alarm in our body telling ourselves, hey, something's up. And so we should, when we see or feel hormonal imbalances like heavy, painful periods, bad PMS, maybe there's a loss of our menstrual cycle, that's a sign that something is off in our body. An internal or external stressor is causing our body to say, hey, girl, there's a fire or internal or external demon here, and I need you to find it. So we need to recognize that hormonal imbalances, yes, they can suck, but they are not truly, they're not the root cause. They're actually the symptom of a root cause. Also, your hormones are like a symphony. If one is off, then it ruins the entire performance. So, our hormones all are intertwined in this beautiful symphony together. So, you might have high cortisol, and that might then filter down into high or low estrogen. Then you might have hypothyroidism that results from that, or vice versa. You might have hypothyroidism that increases thyroid binding globulin, and it might further decrease sex hormone binding globulin, and then you have high estrogen. So there's a lot of imbalances that can occur, and they all work beautifully together. And then, like I said, hormones are not always the root issue. They are the signal, not the cause. And then another key fact is everything starts with your brain and your adrenal glands. So whenever we want to quote unquote heal hormones, especially when it comes down to sleep, we want to start with cortisol first and foremost, because that's what then filters down into how your thyroid and your sex hormones are going to be created, interact, and metabolize as well. So the key common hormonal imbalances that impact sleep, and these are also like the key common hormone imbalances I see in general, are low progesterone or low estrogen. We can also see with low progesterone, high estrogen levels. I also see low testosterone, higher low cortisol, higher low thyroid hormone. I know it's like, okay, well, that's a lot. That's a lot. Yes. And that's why we always, when we suspect that there's a quote unquote hormonal reason why we might be having issues with our sleep, we want to test, don't guess, right? Because there can be a lot of symptoms that can kind of look like the same thing. So we'll go over I have some slides so you guys can like share and compare some of those symptoms. Now, the question is it the chicken or the egg, right? So poor sleep or lack of sleep can then cause a hormonal imbalance, while a hormonal balance can cause poor sleep. And then it becomes a vicious circle of a cycle, right? So you're not sleeping well, and then you're having a hormonal imbalance, and then maybe the hormone imbalance, like low estrogen levels, causes you to have hot flashes and night sweats. And then guess what? You can't sleep because you're having hot flashes and night sweats. And then it becomes a vicious cycle. So unfortunately, that can occur. Plus, lack of sleep can lower your immune system, cause you to have fatigue, brain fog, develop metabolic dysfunction like insulin resistance, which is basically how you utilize glucose for fuel, increase your injury risk, especially if you're like me and you like training in the gym, can lower your digestion, lower detoxification, and it becomes a vicious cycle, which is causing just overall chaos in the body. So these are the slides that I talked about, signs and symptoms of hormonal imbalance here. So estrogen dominance, low progesterone, high testosterone, low testosterone. The key thing I want you to keep in mind is there's quote unquote two different types of having estrogen dominance. You can have high estrogen levels with normal progesterone, or you can have relative estrogen dominance in which you have maybe normal or lower in range like estrogen, but your progesterone is completely null. And progesterone is only produced when you ovulate. So typically I do see that when somebody struggles with anovulation, which of course there's many root causes of that, but we'll dive into that. So these are some signs and symptoms of hormonal imbalances with these specific hormones. And then we dive into these. So this is where we dive into the cortisol symptoms. And as you can see here, low thyroid, low cortisol, high cortisol, they all can look like the same. So I'll give you guys a list of labs that I suggest in regards to checking for potential hormonal imbalances. And these are my favorite. If you need help at all with ordering any of these labs, hit me up via email. My email is at the end of the slides, or at Faith and Fit is my Instagram if you want to work with me or need my help. But these are my favorite blood labs to look at not only hormonal imbalances and looking at your hormones, but also looking for the root causes of your hormones, right? So it might be the fact that you're nutrient deficient, or you have too much of one nutrient, like high iodine. It could be the fact that you have high or low cortisol. It might be mold or heavy metals. There could be a GI pathogen there, or a viral pathogen. So the way I work is I always question the why behind the why. Why are you the way that you are? What has caused your body to say, hey, girl, this is not a safe space? And then cue hormonal imbalances. So let's talk about these hormones. We're not just going to talk about sex hormones. We're also going to talk about the other hormones in your body that are involved with sleep. So first, we got melatonin, one of my favorite hormones. I freaking love melatonin. Melatonin is produced by your pineal gland and is also produced in your gut. So this helps regulate your sleep-wake cycle. I'm sure a lot of you guys are aware of melatonin, and a lot of people taking melatonin exogenously to help support their sleep. Now, the key question I always ask is, well, why aren't you producing melatonin on your own, right? We should be able to produce melatonin in the evenings. That's when it is produced, and also in your gut. And melatonin is beautifully created by a combination of synergistic type of nutrients, and of course, by our bodies. So if we take a look here on this little chart, it's beautiful, right? So there is also we also have to have other specific neurotransmitters that are involved with the creation of melatonin. But overall, melatonin is produced by darkness in the evening. And not only that, but it requires things like tyrosine and B6, because our melatonin comes also from serotonin. Now, I want you to also keep in mind, melatonin, yes, is produced with darkness in the evening. So heck yeah, block blue light in the evenings, please. Don't be scrolling on your phone, having that blue light keeping you up, because that will disrupt your circadian rhythms and disrupt your ability to produce melatonin. But also, if you have high cortisol, that actually competes with your melatonin production. And so if you have high cortisol in the evenings, you're stressed, you're tired and wired at night, you have an issue with falling asleep, you might be low in melatonin, but you might be low in melatonin because you have high cortisol levels. So that's one thing to keep in mind. Another thing to keep in mind is low cortisol inhibits your ability to produce serotonin, and it inhibits your ability to convert serotonin to melatonin. So there can be so many things that impact your ability to produce your own melatonin, melatonin is a hormone. Also, in the last stages of adrenal fatigue, aka low cortisol, when norepinephrine goes low, that serotonin to melatonin conversion drops, and it can make it even harder, because then you have the internal or external stressors plus the nutrient deficiencies further blocking even dopamine, which then converts to VMA, aka epinephrine and norepinephrine, and then that leads into a vicious cycle of low serotonin and melatonin. One other thing to keep in mind is that serotonin sensitivity is truly impacted by light. And so if you don't get in adequate light throughout the day, I want you to think of like seasonal affective disorder that actually can impact your ability to produce melatonin. So if you are over there in Portland and it's dark and you're having issues with sleeping, and it's, dark, and you're like, oh, well, I get darkness during the nighttime. Well, you might not be getting light during the daytime. So that can impact that. Also, estrogen increases the serotonin receptor sensitivity. So low levels of serotonin can contribute to insomnia. And in this type of case, of course, you want to address why is estrogen low. If you're postmenopausal, then it might be like, okay, what can we do to help support more of that serotonin receptor sensitivity? So there are some things that can be helpful: 5-HTP, tryptophan, cofactors like iron, B6, CME, magnesium. Those are just a few of them. But that being said, I'm a big fan of melatonin. I know a lot of people are going to say, can you take melatonin? Regardless, yes, you can. It's not going to cause any harm long term. It's actually very protective in regards to your immune system and your metabolism, and really good for when we're talking about fertility. So I'm a big fan of taking melatonin, but just one thing to keep in mind: if you ever do take it for sleep, everybody has a beautiful Cinderella shoe of melatonin. So some people need less, some people need more. My sweet spot is typically around 2.5 milligrams, or up to 3 or 4. If I go more than that, if I go 5, then I feel like I get hit by a truck in the morning. Nobody likes that. So you got to figure out what makes you feel best. But there's nothing wrong with taking melatonin over the counter. You just want to try and produce it by yourself, right? So what could be going on in your gut? What could be happening in your lifestyle? What could be happening on a nutrient-based level that's preventing you first from producing that on your own? Next, we talk about cortisol. So cortisol has an inverse relationship to melatonin. So we want cortisol to be highest in the morning, lowest in the evening. And then with melatonin, we want that to be, of course, lowest in the morning, highest in the evening. So cortisol plays a big role when we're talking about so many functions in our body, and it's our fight or flight hormone. So whether that's running from a tiger, or getting sick or injured, or carrying from work, pissing us off, we have cortisol that's released. And in the short term, that's anti-inflammatory. So it's reducing inflammation, modulating the immune response, supporting memory, blood pressure, focus, actually shunting the production of our digestion, is trying to get us to run away from that tiger. Now, cortisol in the short term is not an issue. It's when cortisol is long-term chronically elevated that we walk into disruption. So elevated cortisol levels for long periods of time, that's when we walk into the issues with that. So we might have imbalanced blood sugar levels. We might have trouble with being able to recover, especially if we're working out. And then, of course, we have hormonal sleep dysregulation. After a period of time of months, maybe even years of high cortisol, that's when we can walk into the low cortisol phase. And when we hit that low cortisol phase, I mean, shit hits the fan and we can just feel absolutely terrible. And I have another slide that will go over that. But I want you to remember, cortisol is what impacts all your other hormones first and foremost. So if you're ever going to check your hormones, I do like suggesting checking your cortisol first, because it impacts all your other hormones. So the stress response, pretty easy. The thing I want you to keep in mind is stress can be anything, and it can be real versus perceived stress. So you might be like, okay, I'm having trouble sleeping. It might be cortisol, right? It might be high cortisol. And you're like, okay, well, I'm not stressed. Well, your body doesn't really always recognize stress. It can be subconscious stress as well. It could be internal trapped traumas that could be still within your body. So just because you do not feel stressed does not always mean that it's not there. But what we want to do to help support your cortisol, support melatonin, support your sleep, is as best we can, especially at night, keep you in that parasympathetic rest and digest state. So I talked about the little bit of the short-term effects of cortisol. And then, of course, we have the long-term effects of cortisol. This is where we walk into the chaos here. So having the long-term high cortisol walks you into low cortisol, which is then when you feel like absolute crap. And a lot of people are like, I'm gaining a lot of weight. I have a lot of histamine issues, stuffy nose, sinus congestion, inflammation, puffy face, salt and sugar cravings. You guys have seen the slide in regards to the symptoms. So my key thing is, if this looks like you got to check your cortisol ASAP. That way you know what your next step is to support yourself, because any cortisol issue will result in a sleep issue and hormonal issue. So this is the beautiful little picture of how cortisol filters down into all your sex hormones. So that's another important reason why I say it starts with cortisol. Then we have the beautiful picture here of the phases of the stress response. So we go from high cortisol to adaptive cortisol to low cortisol. Now, the symptoms do not always match up. That's why you need to test, don't guess. In this pattern, it can start from a period of years down to months. Sometimes you can go from the alarmed and alert, or what I call the boss bitch mode, high cortisol, high DHEA, high neurotransmitters, to just plain exhausted, or what I call the exhausted pigeon, response. This can happen sometimes even automatically after trauma or even medication induced or vaccine induced. So definitely, I suggest testing, not guessing, and then also realizing what you need to do is always look at your cortisol as of how you're feeling too. So don't just look at the test. You don't just interpret a test based on the test, interpret it based on your symptoms and your signs and your history. And that's where a good practitioner like me or somebody else that is in the functional medicine world should come in. So, strategies to support cortisol imbalances, regardless of what you're doing. This is a general list. So, the parasympathetic support, I love nature time, walking, listening to calming music, journaling, binaural beats. You can also, of course, chat with a friend. You can hug. You can do all these types of things, but this will help support any thing when it comes down to cortisol imbalances. And the worst thing that you could do with high cortisol is drink a lot of caffeine and work out a lot and diet. So if you think that cortisol could be an issue for you, please stop dieting first and foremost and stop stressing yourself out. And I like to also suggest make a list of energy drainers and energy fillers. So ask yourself, what are things that add to my life and fill my life up with helpful things? And what are things that drain my life or people or things that I do that drain me from feeling like my very best self and living the best quality life that I can? So these are going to be helpful little strategies. I'm also a big fan of adaptogens. So there are some adaptogens, and whoops, mess up on the little woman's guide, but that's my book. So this comes from my book. There are some adaptogens, and adaptogens are just, herbs that can help with modulating the stress response or helping your body to adapt to stress. Some are energizing, some are sedating, some are soothing, and some are just overall nourishing. So depending on your situation and where your cortisol levels may be, there might be a better adaptogen that best fits you. For example, if somebody has low cortisol, I want to go to licorice or ginseng or an adrenal glandular, and I want to stay away probably from something like magnolia or lemon balm or valerian. And then, of course, there's things that if somebody has high cortisol, I absolutely love phosphatidylserine. I love ashwagandha. I love magnolia. I love holy basil. So it really just depends on the person. And also, some people are super sensitive to herbs. So I would typically like to start slow. And then also they work synergistically together. So doing at least two is way better than just doing one. But that's where testing comes. Briefly, just going to hit on human growth hormone. Most people do not have any issues with creating their human growth hormone at all. I don't want you guys to think you need to go get human growth hormone shots and be like this guy over here. But something to keep in mind is that having low cortisol or poor sleep can impact your ability to produce human growth hormone. And that's when you lead to even further issues with growth and repair. So we always want to address the why behind why would human growth hormone be low. For some people, I mean, it truly can be an issue with creating it on its own from the pituitary gland. Maybe it's a pituitary tumor or, genetic wise when they were born, but most of the time, no. So if you're having sleep issues, please, and I know it's like it's so trendy right now. Oh, just go boost your human growth hormone. Let's not do that first. Let's ask why. Why is human growth hormone an issue? What's going on with the sleep? What's causing that sleep to be off? And then what's going on a cortisol and nutrient based level? So contributors to hormonal balances, there's so many different ones. I like to think what potential internal or external stressor could there be? So that could be anything and everything from a trauma to mold to heavy metals to gut issues to food sensitivities or allergies, all the way to it might be internal in regards to a nutrient deficiency, poor liver detoxification. So there's a lot of things on this list. And that's where having somebody to see you, not subjectively, but objectively, to be able to look at those internal and external factors and look at your symptoms is very helpful. And I always like to say, you don't know what you don't know, right? So if you're like, oh, I don't know if it could be mold, well, maybe have somebody evaluate your symptoms and your history and figure out, is that something we even need to address just yet? Okay. The biggest things, and I have a slide for it coming up, the best thing that you could do to balance your hormones and help yourself with hormonal imbalances is focus on rest and digest, stress management, parasympathetic work, feeding your body with nutrient dense foods that don't significantly increase your risk for inflammation. So staying away from processed vegetable oils, trans fats, processed foods in general, and then making sure that you are reducing your toxins in your environment. things that you're putting on your skin, your hair, your nail products, what you're cleaning with, what you're cooking with. Staying away from those toxic chemicals could be very, very helpful because they are endocrine disrupting chemicals, right? They're disrupting your ability to both create your sex hormones, metabolize them, and eliminate them. So hormones, when we talk about the creation, I'm just going to briefly go over what it looks like for a healthy hormone cycle. So we have the follicular phase, which is the first day of bleeding all the way to day 14. Day 14 is typically around when we ovulate. It might be day 12, it might be day 16, but we ovulate. And that's when once we ovulate, we release that egg and it travels to produce the corpus luteum in the uterus, which then helps to create progesterone. So the follicular phase, the very first half should be where estrogen is predominating. And then the second half is when we should have predomination of progesterone. So in that luteal phase, that's when we can see if somebody has high estrogen levels, we can see an exacerbation of heavy periods, painful periods, bad PMS, breast tenderness, moodiness, sometimes even like really bad fatigue. And then we can also see some women have significant insomnia if they have low progesterone, because progesterone is very sedating to the body and helps us with calming our system. So we can have insomnia with that. So this is how the menstrual cycle works. I go over this all in my book. This is the step-by-step in regards to how it works as well. The key thing is we can only produce progesterone if we ovulate. So if there's something that prevents us from ovulating, whether that is a nutrient deficiency, gut infections, toxicity, endocrine disrupting chemicals, stressors, illness, injury, whatever it is, that can cause you to not be able to ovulate. And if you don't ovulate, you don't produce progesterone, you're not going to get your period. And then of course you can have issues with sleep for some women. So what is a normal cycle? Well, a normal cycle is definitely not induced by birth control. That's something to keep in mind. Typically, a normal cycle is, 2 to 3 normal base tampons. It lasts typically 3 to 7 days. No major pain. You shouldn't have to be on the couch or in your bed. You shouldn't have to take any NSAIDs, Tylenol, Midol, anything like that. And it should be a bright red to cranberry color. Anything that's off in regards to the heavier light periods here, that means that could be something wrong. If you're spotting and it's not ovulation spotting, so ovulation spotting is when you have a little bit of bleeding around the day that you ovulate. If you're having like 2 periods in a row, like every 2 weeks, that is not normal. If you have to take medication, that is not normal. If you see clots that are bigger than a dime or at a dime, that is not normal. And something is wrong and you need to get help. Okay. Your period also can ebb and flow with the stages of your life. It could be a little bit lighter when you are younger. And then when you're older, it can also get lighter. So some things to keep in mind is your periods will change. And just because you have one off period, it doesn't mean that there's something wrong. Maybe you were sick. Maybe you were ill the time that ovary, the ovarian, not the ovary, the follicle was growing. You might have one off period. You might skip one period because you got sick or you were super stressed or you had a breakup or something happened. So if you have had 2 periods or more that have been light, missed, or heavy, that's when you want to get some testing done. So these are my key favorite things to address when we're talking about hormonal imbalances. So first, we want to optimize the diet. So make sure that you are eating enough. That's key, because if you're not eating enough, you're not going to have your period. Your body says, guess what? I'm starved. This is not a safe time for me to have a baby. So you want to eat enough. Eating too much, of course, is not right either, because then your body is going to potentially upregulate aromatase, increase testosterone, increase insulin resistance. And then you might not ovulate after that because that prevents ovulation, or you might develop estrogen dominance. So it's figuring out, okay, what is a good intake for you? And then making sure you're balancing your blood sugar is huge, especially when we talk about not developing insulin resistance. And insulin resistance then prevents you from being able to use glucose as fuel, and then you deposit even more body fat, and that contributes to the hormonal and cortisol dysregulation and insomnia, sleep issues, because it alters how your body uses food as fuel. So that's very important. Just a note on that with insulin resistance, some people do, with being insulin resistant or not feeding themselves properly, not balancing their blood sugar properly, they develop insomnia, because what happens is your body, when you're sleeping, is supposed to be getting your liver to release glucose as fuel. So say that you have, you didn't eat a good amount of protein and a fiber rich carb or fat, you didn't balance your meal or snack prior to going to bed, well, your body is going to be like, okay, I don't have enough food, because you might go hypoglycemic at night. Say that you just had carbs, right? You just had a carb, or you didn't have a good amount of balance with that. You might go hypoglycemic, and then your body is going to say, okay, let me release cortisol to get your liver to produce and release glucose for fuel because I'm hypoglycemic. And when it does that, it wakes you up. So balancing your blood sugar is very, very important. An example of a good meal or snack before you go to bed would be like sweet potatoes, chicken, olive oil, some veggies. Or you could do what I love in a little oatmeal bowl, protein oats. I know I love it. Oatmeal, flax seeds, berries, a little bit of protein powder. Or you can do something like air popped popcorn with some dark chocolate and a little bit of collagen on the side, or a little bit of like turkey breast. I know that sounds weird, but very important to make sure you balance your blood sugar. And then when I say liver detoxification, so the liver the liver in Chinese medicine can wake us up and prevent us from being able to fall and stay asleep. So making sure you're, of course, focusing on reducing the toxic bucket, reducing the endocrine disrupting chemicals in your diet is first. Making sure that you're getting liver detoxification rich foods, your leafy greens, your berries, your cruciferous vegetables, abundance in your protein, and variety in your diet is key. Those are things. And then I'm a big fan of castor oil packs. If you've never tried them, you just take a castor, you can either make your own, or if you want to Google the Queen of Thrones castor oil pack, you can do that prior to bed, and that can support your sleep. And then, of course, with gut health, there could be major issues with parasites, gut dysbiosis, and that can actually wake you up at night because parasites are actually more active in the evening. And then two, it can cause alterations in your serotonin production and your neurotransmitters. And it, as we already talked about, like those neurotransmitters can greatly impact your ability to produce melatonin, helping you to fall and stay asleep. So a lot of things that can go on here, but I hope this list helps you out on what are the things that I can address and what can I focus on to help support my hormones, but also support my sleep. And the key thing is when I'm working with clients, I 100% like customize this. So there's no one set thing that you can do. I customize this based on the person, their symptoms, and their history. Now, when we're talking about estrogen versus progesterone, there, of course, are different roles of each. Estrogen, I just don't want you guys to victimize. It plays a big role with creating a lot of good things in your body. So we're talking about skin health, youthfulness, sleeping. We already talked about that serotonin connection, building lean muscle, preventing ourselves from having cardiovascular disease, having a healthy libido, not having vaginal dryness. So we do want estrogen in our body. And I don't want you guys to victimize it, because we definitely want estrogen, especially when we're talking about sleep. Okay. So high estrogen levels, I honestly don't see a lot of high estrogen cause insomnia. It's more like high cortisol causing the high estrogen causes the insomnia and sleep issues. But the key thing is low estrogen can definitely contribute to sleep issues. So we want a healthy amount of estrogen. If you have questions on if is my estrogen level or are my estrogen levels are healthy, you're more than happy to, of course, book a call with me, or of course, use all the resources in my book. So when it comes down to estrogen, progesterone, and sleep, we talked about low levels of estrogen, what that can do. Low progesterone can also decrease your stress resiliency. So whenever somebody has lack of progesterone, maybe that's because they're stressed. They're not producing it because they have a missing nutrient, gut infection, endocrine disrupting chemicals, you name it, whatever that's causing the lack of progesterone or the lower progesterone being produced, that can contribute to high cortisol, which then can contribute to sleep issues. And then, of course, high cortisol suppresses melatonin. Also, progesterone is a hypnotic and it has a sleep-inducing effect, which is why women that take progesterone therapies, they take it at night because it actually helps you with falling asleep or can make you sedated. It's another reason why women, when they become pregnant, right, especially in the first half of the trimester, they're exhausted because their body is producing way more progesterone than they ever have. So that's another reason why progesterone is very helpful for sleep. Some people actually with insomnia just take it for sleep. And then progesterone helps with GABA production, which plays a big role also with supporting your sleep. Now, briefly on estrogen, I do want to go over kind of just like overall important things when it comes down to our overall sex hormones, not just how they're involved with sleep, but just some key things with how we metabolize our estrogen, how we metabolize all our hormones here. So we have three main types of estrogen. E1 predominates in the menopausal years, E2 fertile years, and E3 in pregnancy. So most women, if you're doing your testing for your hormones, you're going to check estradiol unless you're in your menopausal years or unless you're in pregnancy. And you can check all of these three together actually in the blood, or you can also check them in your in a Dutch test, so in urine. So when it comes down to symptoms, I also had it in my previous, of course, little slide, but these are also potential causes of specifically why you would have high estrogen levels. The one that I see the most is definitely endocrine disrupting chemicals, blood sugar dysregulation, high cortisol, and nutrient deficiencies and poor liver detoxification. I know that was a long laundry list, but typically there's more than one root cause. There's multiple root causes. And that's the thing. We don't want to just address the hormones, right? Hormones are the chemical, they're the messenger, right? They're telling ourselves there's something wrong. So though we do want to, of course, work on estrogen and work on lowering it, we want to address why is it high in the first place? Always want to address the root cause, not just band-aid slap a symptom, just like birth control, right? If you have heavy painful periods and you're like, okay, let me take birth control so I don't get a period. Well, why do you have painful heavy periods in the first place? That would be the key. Root cause always. Then progesterone, we talked about the functions a little bit in regards to the hypnotic effect, but progesterone is actually, it acts as a natural diuretic. So if you don't have enough progesterone sometimes, then you can also feel that water retention and you can feel puffy and feel like you've gained weight. And then progesterone, people don't know, it actually promotes a healthy sex drive. The progesterone is the yin to our estrogen's yang, and it does influence also our serotonin and GABA, which plays a big role with our mood and sleep. And I typically see whenever progesterone is low, or of course, if somebody's not even ovulating and not making it at all, they have increased stress and anxiety and depression. So the key thing is figuring out, why is progesterone low? What are the potential reasons why somebody might not be producing it? And as we know, progesterone is only produced when you ovulate. So that's the key thing. And we want to question, why is somebody not ovulating? There are other ways to check and see if you produced progesterone. There are progesterone strips that you can use. LH strips check for ovulation. Progesterone strips, like the Prove, check to see if there's progesterone. And then you can also do something like a Dutch cycle map to see how your estrogen and progesterone levels are moving throughout your cycle. And then you can also use things like your basal body temperature, cervical mucus, cervix positioning, all to see how you are creating progesterone and how is that sustained throughout that luteal phase of your cycle. And my book dives into all of this and then how you can measure them. So these are the symptoms of having low progesterone and the potential root causes. The biggest root causes I see with low progesterone: nutrient deficiencies or undereating or overexercising. Honestly, those are the main ones that I see. Of course, there's so many others, but those are the main ones. Then we have testosterone, which plays a big role for us as females with, of course, building muscle mass and maintaining a healthy sex drive. The key thing I want you guys to remember is when it comes down to testosterone, if you have too much testosterone, that prevents you from ovulating. And if you can't ovulate, then one, you can't become pregnant and you're not going to have a period. Potentially, you're going to have a missed or skipped period. And you're not going to produce progesterone. So then you're going to potentially have issues with sleeping. So high testosterone 1000% can cause insomnia and sleep issues. Now, of course, there are different types of testosterone. So some people have quote unquote normal testosterone in the blood, but they feel like they have symptoms of high testosterone, which can be hair loss, especially around the scalp, oily skin, acne, aggression, anger. You can also have like these weird types of like lines and marks on your skin or skin tags that can indicate that you have high testosterone levels. The key thing is most of the time with high test, I see jawline acne, hair loss, and facial hair. And we can have and produce what's called ethyl-K-lanolone, which is, it elevates the ability to produce DHT, which is 3 times more androgenic than the other one. But if we produce and we have more DHT, sometimes our testosterone levels can look normal in the blood, but we truly have higher levels of DHT. So we are more sensitive to that testosterone. And that's where the Dutch test can come into play and tell us, like, how are we truly metabolizing our testosterone? Because sometimes your testosterone can look normal in the blood, but you have more DHT in the urine. And that's where you can work on that pathway. And typically, of course, you've got to address the why behind that pathway. And typically it's stress or blood sugar dysregulation, but it can give you more insight into why you have those symptoms. And of course, testosterone is produced when you sleep, when you have that deep REM sleep. So if you are having issues with insomnia, well, guess what? You're not producing the adequate amount of testosterone that you could have. And that's when a lot of people also develop issues with, of course, their libido, but gaining muscle in the gym and optimizing their body composition. So signs of low and high testosterone and potential root causes as well. Then I have just a little slide on how to fix testosterone. Root cause, please and always. But these are some additional things that you could do to help support high testosterone levels or low. Now, dietary considerations for almost everybody when we're talking about supporting hormones. I'm a big fan of balancing your blood sugar first and foremost. This is very important when we're talking about sleep management. Like I already said, we want to make sure that we are balancing our blood sugar, never have just a carb by itself. We don't want a naked carb. We want a carb with a friend. So pair your carbs with your fat or protein and or fiber. For example, a banana with rice cake, a banana with almond butter, or rice cakes with almond butter instead of just rice cakes or instead of just a banana. And then say, for example, that you want to have like a Mexican bowl, choosing, your chicken breast, your avocado, your brown rice instead of your white rice plus your veggies is going to be so much better than if you did the white rice versus the brown. We want to really focus on those slower digesting carbohydrates and balancing our blood sugar throughout the day. And I like to say eating, around 5 times a day max is a great option. Just make sure that also to help with insulin resistance and your blood sugar management, that if you feel like you suffer from sleep issues, try having a balanced snack before you go to bed. Then to further help support hormones, we want to reduce the inflammatory foods, those processed vegetable oils, especially at a high heat. So olive oil and avocado oil are my favorite to cook with. You want to stay away from more of the soybean oils and the canola oils. Lower the added sugars in your diet. And then, based on the individual, some things can be inflammatory. For some, that might be gluten, wheat, dairy, eggs, soy, or nuts. But I always focus on how can we have an abundant variety type of diet as much as possible, filled with so much color. That's what I really want for you guys. So antioxidants, polyphenols, phytonutrients. Oh my gosh, power them up. Get as many as you can. If you can do like 1 cup with lunch and dinner, and then maybe an extra cup as a snack or something like that for your veggies, that would be fantastic. And at least half a cup of fruit a day. And every single time you sit down to have a meal, have at least 2 different colors in your vegetables, because that really helps to protect your body against oxidative stress, DNA damage, and of course also supports inflammation. And if you have inflammation, then that can contribute to your hormonal imbalances and lack of neurotransmitter productions, and that leads you to have insomnia or sleep issues. We also want to focus on the omega-3 to omega-6 ratio. So omega-6s are going to be more found in your processed vegetable oils, but they can also be found in things like peanuts instead of almonds. So focus on the more of the omega-3s than the omega-6s if you can. And then I'm a big fan to support your hormones, to have natural detoxification, focusing on fiber, and to support a healthy gut. And if there's not a healthy gut, there's not going to be healthy hormones. And then that filters down into insomnia. So for you guys, please focus getting on at least 35 up to 40, 50 grams a day of fiber. Get as much fiber as you can without causing yourself GI distress, and get variety in that fiber too. Now, some people can only handle 25. Other people can train their guts to handle 55, like me. So it all is dependent on what you can do. But my favorite thing to support hormones, whether it's testosterone, estrogen, progesterone, and of course support the gut, is doing 2 tablespoons of freshly ground organic flax seeds per day. Always focus on food from focus on fiber from the food source as much as you can too, because then you're getting a synergistic effect of the nutrients in that food too. Then briefly, we have PCOS, which is typically overdiagnosed nowadays, but the key thing is PCOS is an umbrella diagnosis. And the reason it's overdiagnosed now is because it's based off of 3 criteria. And you just have to have 2 of the 3 in order to be diagnosed. So abnormal menstrual cycle, which could just be because somebody's, under eating and over exercising, abnormal menstrual cycle, high androgen levels, or the presence of polycystic ovaries, which actually, by fact, we as women, we have various amount of follicles. So we have polycystic ovaries because there's going to be a race for those follicles to develop, and then one's going to rupture upon ovulation, and then it's going to travel to potentially have pregnancy happen. So the PCOS diagnosis is based on two of these three. My opinion and belief is that the real PCOS diagnosis is based off of androgen PCOS, meaning high androgen levels are causing that PCOS to happen. So there are quote unquote different types of PCOS that are addressed, but my personal opinion is true PCOS is when you have high testosterone levels, the polycystic ovaries, or high androgen levels, loss of your period. That's when the PCOS diagnosis should be made. Other than that, there's something else going on, but you can put yourself in these different types of PCOS if you've been giving that diagnosis. So it could be driven by insulin resistance. It could be post-birth control syndrome. It could be adrenal, so stress related, or inflammatory. And then that inflammatory could be toxins, it could be gut, it could be nutrient deficiencies, you name it. So these are the different causes of PCOS. And in my book, I talk about these causes, what to do about every single one of these causes if you guys have any questions. Then we have PMS. So as we know, PMS, it can absolutely be terrible and disrupt your quality of life. Typically, there's a reason why you have PMS, though. So we want to factor that in. These are some of the causes, and then some of the things you could do to master your PMS. The key thing is if you have bad PMS and you're not sleeping, you got to look at cortisol, look at your nutrients first and foremost, and then look at your gut. Those are the key things that I would recommend. Then another hormone involved with sleep and your sex hormones and is impacted by cortisol too is your thyroid. And your thyroid is the powerhouse of your metabolism, just like the mitochondria is the powerhouse of the cell. It's what will upregulate or downregulate your metabolism. So say that you're gaining some weight. Could be, of course, it could be your thyroid. It could be the fact that you're just eating too much, but it could be your thyroid. It could be inflammation. It could be cortisol. Just always keep in mind, thyroid disruptions will cause sleep disruptions. For example, hypothyroidism and hyperthyroidism. So hypo is low, hyper is high. Both of those can cause insomnia. So that's why it's very important to test your thyroid hormones. T4 and T3 are both created in your thyroid gland. Your body predominantly produces T4, typically around like 80 to 90%, and then the rest is T3. You also have T1, T2, all the other types of thyroid hormone, but for the most part, we produce T4, and then that has to then convert to T3 to be active. The key thing is if you have insomnia, well, that can actually slow your ability to produce T3, and it can go to reverse T3 as it being a stressor. And there could be also other stressors that increase reverse T3 and prevent T3 from doing its job, because T4 can't do the work. It doesn't do the work in the metabolism. T3 does. So if there is, higher low cortisol, inflammation, toxicities, a stressor, a nutrient deficiency, that can lower your ability to produce thyroid hormone. And then that can leave you in a vicious cycle of having insomnia and then worsen every single thing in your life. Because let's be real, if you're not sleeping, you feel like an exhausted pigeon and you can't enjoy your quality of life, and it just becomes terrible. So checking your thyroid hormones can be very helpful. And I always suggest, like I listed out in the previous slide with labs, checking TSH, free T4, free T3, and then also checking for Hashimoto. So TGAB and TPO antibodies, because that indicates the presence of Hashimoto's, which is the autoimmune form of hypothyroidism, in which your thyroid actually becomes destructed because some shape or form of toxin, maybe it's gluten, heavy metals, mold, maybe it's a gut infection, and that actually decreases your ability to produce thyroid hormone on its own. And then you're stuck on thyroid medication the rest of your life. So things to look at. And these are some extra things that can impact your thyroid function. So you got to have some key nutrients for both the creation and the metabolism of your thyroid. And then also something to keep in mind is cellular sensitivity to thyroid hormones. So stress, infections, inflammation can lower your sensitivity to thyroid hormone. So you might have normal thyroid levels in the blood, but you might feel hypothyroid, and that might be because you're not utilizing your thyroid hormone in the best way possible. So hormone testing, what you can do to check and see what your hormone levels are. I always like to do blood first. Blood is king. So check your sex hormones 5 to 7 days before your period: estrogen, testosterone, progesterone. If you want to check and see if there might be a PCOS type of scenario, you can also pull an LH and an FSH on day 3, but you don't always have to. I'm also a big fan of doing urine testing for using the Dutch test to see how you metabolize your sex hormones. So we talked about that DHT. You can check that. You can check how you're metabolizing your estrogen via phase 1 and 2 detox pathways too. There are some different types of metabolization in your estrogen pathways that can make your estrogen, even though it looks normal, it can make you feel even more estrogen dominant. And working on some of those pathways can greatly help you with symptoms. So I like to start with the blood first. And if you could do blood and urine, that can be great. And if you have like really, really off periods and you feel like you are just completely like a moody ridden mess, you might want to look into doing a cycle mapping that can check and see how your estrogen, your progesterone levels are moving throughout the entire menstrual cycle. It's completely fascinating. So this is the Dutch. I absolutely love the Dutch test. So if you guys have any questions on that, or you want to order a Dutch test, I can order that for all my clients. I like the Dutch Plus because then you're getting saliva cortisol, which is king for cortisol testing. But the Dutch test is going to look at your sex hormones, your sex hormone metabolites, your cortisol metabolites, neurotransmitters, all that. So I'm a big fan of the Dutch test. I have a lot of different trainings or, little resources on my Instagram at Faith and Fit if you have questions. And of course, I dive into a lot of this again in my book, The Women's Guide to Hormonal Harmony. But absolutely love the Dutch. Absolutely. If you have any hormonal imbalances, like please start with cortisol, but then of course, get your test done and then look into the blood. Look into the urine. I also have a supplement company that I created because I saw that my clients were just struggling with their hormones and struggling with stress and struggling with sleep. So I made my own supplement line. I personally made every single one of these formulations. I picked the ingredients, I picked the dosing, I picked of course, the sourcing. And I created this in a third-party tested, heavy metal tested, microbial tested, mold tested, awesome manufacturer. Freaking love them. But these are my supplements. And if you want to try any of them, I love my Magical Sleep. It is my baby and I take it on a nightly basis. And then Hormonal Harmony would be for anybody that struggles with maybe infertility, heavy PMS, painful periods, anything that is, off in regards to estrogen or PCOS even, you could definitely support with my Hormonal Harmony. And then my Stress Defender, if anybody has high cortisol or chronic stress and anxiety. So these are my supplements. Feel free to try them. And then if you guys want any further help, questions, comments, or concerns, please, my book is such a big tool and resource. I poured my heart and my brain into this thing. And I doubt anybody's going to ever read this book and be like, I didn't learn something. So I really suggest reading The Women's Guide to Hormonal Harmony. It talks even more about cortisol, sex hormones, gut health, anything and everything that could impact your sex hormones. And if you want my help one-on-one, again, my name is Lacey. I am more than happy to help you guys. This is my email. You can also hit up my podcast, which has a lot of helpful tools and resources and ways that you can learn more about how to optimize your overall health. So I'm just so beyond thankful that I've been able to do this presentation for you guys. Thank you so much for listening. I hope you learned a lot. And then hit me up. My Instagram is at Faith and Fit. If you guys want to follow me, learn more, contact me, or if you need help with your labs, I'm more than happy to help order labs for you. And then, of course, help go over those with you too. So thank you guys so much. I hope you have a beautiful rest of your day and enjoy the rest of the summit.